The Japanese lieutenant watches from his pillbox as the Marine crawls closer through the volcanic ash. The walls around him are 4 feet of reinforced concrete. Nothing the Americans have thrown at them for 3 days has cracked it. Not the naval bombardment, not the artillery, not even the bazookas that skittered off like pebbles. He knows he's safe. He knows the thick walls will protect him. Then he sees the Marine rolling forward with something on his back, something that makes the riflemen scatter. The Marine gets within 20 yards. The lieutenant is still thinking about the concrete when the orange flame splashes through the firing slit like liquid sunlight. That's when he learns what his engineers never told him. Reinforced concrete doesn't burn, but the oxygen inside it does. Meeting them. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams was 5 foot 6 inches of West Virginia farm boy who'd been told twice he was too short to be a Marine. The height requirements got lowered after Pearl Harbor, and by February 1945, he'd made it 8,000 miles from the dairy farm in Ona to a volcanic rock called Iwo Jima. He was 21 years old. He'd joined because he liked the dress blues better than the Army's ugly brown wool, and he knew nothing about the Marine Corps beyond that. Williams supervised 6 other flamethrower operators in a special weapons unit. They'd received crates of M2 flamethrowers on Guadalcanal in early 1944 with no instructions, no manual, no guidance on tactics. 70 pounds of pressurized tanks, rubber hoses, and jellied gasoline strapped to your back. We had to learn that ourselves, Williams said. Figure out the igniter, learn to aim the stream, discover through trial how napalm behaves differently than straight gasoline, how it sticks, how it burns, how it kills. Private, first class. Tony Stein carried a homemade machine gun he'd welded together from a wrecked Navy fighter plane. 19-year-old Private Jim Naughton from Denver had been in the Marines for 8 months. Captain Donald Beck commanded C Company, 1st Battalion, 21st Marines, and he'd been studying the aerial photos of Iwo Jima for weeks, trying to understand what they were up against. The photographs didn't tell him much. Most of the Japanese positions were underground. The enemy they were facing had been on Iwo Jima since June 1944, when Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi arrived with orders from Prime Minister Tojo himself. Make this island impregnable. Kuribayashi brought 21,000 men and a brilliant, brutal plan. He'd studied American tactics in the Marianas. He knew beach defenses failed, so he went underground. The world they inhabit. The Japanese had discovered something remarkable about Iwo Jima's volcanic ash. When mixed with Portland cement, it made concrete superior to anything they'd ever poured on the mainland. The soft volcanic tuff was easy to tunnel, yet resistant to shock. They carved out 11 miles of tunnels connecting 300 separate fortifications, spider holes barely large enough for one man, massive pillboxes with walls 4 feet thick, underground barracks that could hold 400 troops. They buried Type 97 tanks up to their turrets in the volcanic sand, turning mobile armor into immovable steel bunkers. The Marines landing on February 19, 1945, had been told to expect maybe 13,000 defenders. Intelligence was wrong. They'd also been told the pre-invasion bombardment, the heaviest of the Pacific War, would soften the defenses. That was wrong too. You can't bombard what's 20 meters underground. Williams and his team spent D-Day moving supplies from the beach through volcanic sand that swallowed men to their ankles and stopped vehicles cold. The sand was black, loose, and unlike anything they'd trained on. It contained enough magnetite to fool mine detectors, which meant the Japanese could sow mines wherever they wanted. The heat was oppressive. The sulfur smell was everywhere. Rotten eggs mixed with cordite and death. By D+3, the Marines had taken Mount Suribachi's lower slopes and were pushing toward the center of the island, where 2 Japanese airfields sat surrounded by Kuribayashi's main defensive belt. That's where they ran into the pillboxes. Bazookas and that sort of thing had no effect on them, Williams would recall decades later. They were so thick and well built. Artillery couldn't touch them. Tank rounds skipped off. The concrete absorbed everything. The build-up. The morning of February 23, 1945, brought C Company to a full stop. A cluster of Japanese pillboxes covered the approach to Airfield No. 2. Interlocking fields of fire. Machine guns behind firing slits you could barely see. Every time the Marines tried to advance, the bunkers opened up. Men went down. The attack stalled. Captain Beck called a meeting in a shell crater. The company had been stuck here for hours. They'd lost men trying to rush the positions. They'd lost men trying to flank them. The tanks couldn't get close enough. The terrain was too broken, and the Japanese had dug anti-tank ditches. Beck knew what could work. He'd seen flamethrowers clear bunkers before, but flamethrower operators had a life expectancy of about 4 minutes in combat. The bright orange flames made you a target for every sniper and machine gunner who could see you. You moved slower, carrying 70 pounds, and if a bullet punctured those tanks on your back, well, the movies got that part wrong. They usually just leaked, but that was bad enough. 6 flamethrower operators had landed with the company on D-Day. By midday on February 23rd, Williams was the only one left. Dead or wounded, he didn't know which. Beck looked at Williams and asked if he thought he could make progress with the flamethrower. Williams said he'd try. They assigned him 4 riflemen for covering fire and a pole charge man, a Marine carrying a long piece of wood with explosives taped to the end. The plan was simple. Williams would shoot flame through the firing slits. The pole charge man would stick the explosive inside to finish the job. The riflemen would protect them both. At 6:30, Williams strapped on the tanks and moved out. The pole charge man gets hit in the helmet within the first 30 yards. Not killed, just knocked silly, wandering back toward the lines in a daze. The covering riflemen try to keep up with Williams, but the machine gun fire is too heavy. One goes down, then another. Williams is on his own. He doesn't remember making the decision to continue. He just does. The weight of the flamethrower makes him move in a crouch, almost a crawl. The volcanic ash gives way beneath his knees. Bullets ricochet off the steel tanks on his back, a sound like hammers on an anvil, and each impact jolts through his whole body. The tanks are supposed to be bulletproof. Supposed to be. The first pillbox is 25 yards ahead. He can see the barrel of a Japanese machine gun protruding from a slit maybe 8 inches wide. The concrete around it is pockmarked from rifle fire and grenade shrapnel, but the structure itself is intact. 4 feet of reinforced concrete. Naval guns couldn't crack it. Williams has 70 pounds of jellied gasoline and compressed nitrogen. He closes to 20 yards, 15. The machine gun opens up and he presses himself flat, tasting sulfur and ash. Rounds crack over his head. He can hear shouting from inside the bunker. Japanese voices, sharp and urgent. They've seen him. They know what he's carrying. 10 yards. He rises to his knees, aims the nozzle, squeezes the trigger. The M2 flamethrower shoots napalm, not gasoline. Harvard chemists developed it by mixing aluminum salts of naphthenic and palmitic acids with fuel. Take the Na from naphthenic, palm from palmitic, and you get napalm. It's jellied. It sticks. It burns at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. When Williams fires, the stream doesn't arc like water from a hose. It projects in a coherent mass, a rolling ball of flame that splashes through the 8-inch firing slit and keeps going. Inside the bunker, physics takes over. The burning napalm doesn't have to touch the defenders to kill them. A 900 cubic foot space, 14.5 square feet of ventilation between the door and the firing slits. The napalm consumes oxygen faster than the ventilation can replace it. The fire generates carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. The temperature inside the bunker climbs past 1,000 degrees Celsius within seconds. The men inside have time to scream, but not time to escape. Williams doesn't wait to see the results. He's already crawling toward the second pillbox 30 yards to the left. His tanks hold enough fuel for about 10 seconds of continuous fire, divided into roughly 6 or 7 bursts. He's used one. He has 5 left before he needs to go back and refuel. The second bunker is different. The firing slit faces away from him. It's covering a different approach, but he spots a ventilation hole in the top, maybe 6 inches across, a wisp of smoke escaping from it. The Japanese built ventilation into their bunkers because without it, the sulfur fumes from Iwo's volcanic soil would accumulate and poison them. The ventilation that keeps them alive makes them vulnerable. Williams gets within 15 yards and aims for the ventilation hole. The stream of napalm arcs high, splashes into the opening. He can't see what happens inside, but he can imagine it. The jellied fire doesn't just drip through, it sprays, coating the ceiling, the walls, raining down on whoever's below. The screaming starts immediately. 3 Japanese soldiers burst from the bunker's rear entrance, uniforms burning, and collapse in the open. Williams's covering riflemen, the ones who are left, cut them down. A third bunker, then a fourth. Each one presents a new problem. One has its firing slit protected by a steel plate with just a narrow gap. Williams has to get within 10 yards, close enough that he can see the eyes of the gunner behind the slit, close enough that missing is impossible. He fires. The flame splashes in. The eyes disappear. Another bunker is dug into a hillside with multiple entrances. Williams hits the main entrance, watches Japanese soldiers pour from the side exits straight into Marine rifle fire. The flamethrower doesn't just kill the defenders, it drives them out of positions they'd die to hold. The psychological effect is as devastating as the physical one. Between each attack, Williams has to crawl back to the Marine lines to refuel. 7 gallons of napalm mixture, pressurized tanks of nitrogen. The mechanics check the seals, check the igniter, slap him on the back and send him forward again. He makes 5 trips back, 5 refuelings. Each time he goes forward, the Japanese are more prepared. They know what's coming. They concentrate their fire on the slow-moving Marine with the tanks on his back. Bullets punch through his flamethrowers' hoses. They hit the tanks. Solid impacts that leave dents but don't penetrate. Shrapnel from a mortar round cuts his arm. He keeps moving. There's a kind of momentum to it now, a terrible rhythm. Crawl forward through ash that clings to sweat-soaked utilities. Find the bunker. Get close enough. Fire. Watch the flames splash through concrete slits that were supposed to be impregnable. Hear the screaming. Don't think about the screaming. Crawl back. Refuel. Do it again. On the 7th bunker, or maybe the 8th, he loses count. 3 Japanese soldiers charge out with bayonets fixed before he can fire. They're not running away. They're running at him. Close quarters. Too close. Williams drops the flamethrower nozzle and pulls his pistol. He shoots the first soldier at 10 feet, the second at 5. The third man's bayonet is close enough to touch when a Marine rifleman's bullet catches him in the chest. Williams picks up the flamethrower, checks the igniter, moves on. The official citation will say he single-handedly eliminated 7 pillboxes over a 4-hour period, fighting alone after his covering team became casualties. But the men who watched from the Marine lines saw something else. They saw one small Marine moving methodically from bunker to bunker, bringing fire to positions that bombs and shells couldn't touch. They saw concrete fortifications that had held for 3 days emptying under sustained flamethrower attack. They saw Japanese defenders who'd fight to the last man choosing to run from the flames. By 1400 hours, the pillbox complex is cleared. The way is open to Airfield Number 2. C Company can advance. Williams walks back to the company position, the empty flamethrower still strapped to his back, and sits down hard in the volcanic ash. His hands are shaking. Someone hands him water. Captain Beck is already writing the citation that will put Williams in front of President Truman 9 months later, receiving the Medal of Honor. On Mount Suribachi, 5 Marines and a Navy corpsman are raising a flag that will become the most famous photograph of the war. Williams sees it happen. The flag going up, visible across most of the island. It's a good moment. But down in the draws and ravines, the bunkers are still full. The battle for Iwo Jima has 33 more days to go. Immediate aftermath of the 6 flamethrower operators who landed with C Company on D-Day, Williams is the only one still combat effective on February 23rd. 2 are confirmed dead. 3 are wounded badly enough to be evacuated. The 4 riflemen assigned to cover Williams' attack are all casualties. 3 killed, 1 wounded. The pole charge man survived with a concussion. The pillbox complex Williams cleared contained the bodies of 43 Japanese soldiers when engineers went through later to demolish the positions with satchel charges. Most died from burns, asphyxiation, or carbon monoxide poisoning. A few died from bullets when they fled burning bunkers. 1 officer was found at his post in a command bunker, dead at his map table from oxygen depletion. The fire had consumed all the air before he could evacuate. Williams' flamethrower is damaged but still functional. The hoses have holes from bullets that somehow missed igniting the fuel. The tanks have dents. The igniter worked throughout the entire action, which was not always guaranteed. The M2's electrical ignition system was notoriously temperamental in the humidity of the Pacific. By nightfall, C Company has advanced 500 yards. It's excellent progress for Iwo Jima, where advances were typically measured in tens of yards. But it cost them. 18 men killed, 32 wounded over the course of the day. The company is at 60% strength. The battalion commander decides they've earned a brief rest. Williams sleeps in a shell crater that night. He doesn't talk about what happened. Neither do most of the men who used flamethrowers. There's nothing to say that doesn't sound like excuse or boast, and neither feels right. You did what needed doing. The bunkers had to be cleared. The flamethrower was the only weapon that worked. Processing the reality. Over the next week, word spreads through the division about what happened on February 23rd. Not the flag raising. Everyone knows about that immediately. The other thing. The farm boy from West Virginia who cleared 7 pillboxes alone. It becomes a story told in foxholes, passed between units. The details get exaggerated in some tellings, understated in others. Some men say Williams is crazy. Others say he's the bravest Marine on the island. Williams doesn't hear most of it. He's back on the line, still carrying the flamethrower, still moving toward the next bunker complex. Other flamethrower teams across the island are experiencing similar results. The M4 Sherman tanks modified with flame projectors, the ones the troops call Zippos, prove devastatingly effective. They can pump 10,000 gallons of napalm a day into Japanese fortifications. Tank armor protects the crew from the suicidal attacks that killed so many infantry flamethrower operators. The Japanese do everything they can to stop the flame tanks, including sending soldiers with satchel charges straight at them, but the Shermans keep advancing. By early March, after-action reports are crossing desks at Marine headquarters. The reports are unanimous. flamethrowers are the decisive weapon against Iwo Jima's fortifications. Artillery creates rubble but can't penetrate the deep bunkers. Naval bombardment is too imprecise. Grenades and satchel charges work but require troops to get dangerously close. The flamethrower, for all its dangers to the operator, can reach inside reinforced concrete and kill everyone there. The larger context emerges. Kuribayashi's defensive plan was brilliant. By going underground, by building bunkers with walls thick enough to withstand battleship guns, he'd created fortifications that should have been impregnable. His engineers had calculated every angle, reinforced every weak point, sighted every position for maximum killing efficiency. They'd poured tons of concrete mixed with volcanic ash, concrete so strong it exceeded military specifications. What they hadn't calculated was fire. Not the fire from explosions. Concrete handles that well. The fire that enters through 8-inch slits and consumes oxygen faster than ventilation systems designed for sulfur fumes can replace it. The fire that sticks to surfaces and burns at temperatures that turn enclosed spaces into ovens. The fire that creates carbon monoxide in concentrations lethal within seconds. Japanese troops on Iwo Jima had their own flamethrowers. The Type 93 and Type 100 models they'd used with devastating effect in China and early Pacific campaigns. But those were offensive weapons designed for attacking fortifications. By 1945, Japan was on the defensive, and their flamethrowers sat unused while American flamethrowers systematically reduced the positions they'd spent months building. Intelligence reports compiled after the battle revealed the Japanese were aware of American flamethrower tactics from earlier island campaigns. Kuribayashi had received reports about flamethrower use at Tarawa and Saipan, but the scale and sophistication of Iwo Jima's fortifications suggested he believed the sheer thickness of concrete would protect his men. 4 feet of reinforced concrete can't burn, but the air inside it can be consumed, and men need oxygen more than they need concrete walls. Of the 27 Medals of Honor awarded for actions on Iwo Jima, 12 were for efforts to eliminate enemy fortifications. 6 of those 12 men survived to receive their medals. Woody Williams was one of them. The ratio tells its own story about the cost of reducing Kuribayashi's Fortress Island. The battle lasted 36 days. American casualties, 6,821 killed, 19,217 wounded. Japanese casualties, approximately 18,000 killed, only 216 taken prisoner. It remains the only battle in World War II where American casualties exceeded Japanese casualties. It's still the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history, and it was won, more than any other weapon or tactic, by fire that could burn through stone. What this reveals. The flamethrower at Iwo Jima represents a fundamental truth about warfare that no amount of engineering can overcome. Every defensive system has a weakness. Kuribayashi built fortifications that could withstand the most powerful bombardment the U.S. Navy could deliver. He created bunkers that artillery couldn't collapse and bazookas couldn't penetrate. His defensive plan was tactically sound. His fortifications were superbly constructed, and his troops were willing to die at their posts. He didn't account for a weapon that didn't need to destroy the concrete, only consume the air inside it. The effectiveness of flamethrowers at Iwo Jima changed Marine Corps doctrine. By the time the invasion of Okinawa began 2 months later, flamethrower teams were integrated into every assault company. Production of flame-equipped Sherman tanks increased. Training for flamethrower operators became standardized. The weapon that had arrived in crates on Guadalcanal with no instructions became a cornerstone of Pacific war tactics. But the cost in human terms was staggering. Flamethrower operators had the shortest life expectancy of any combat role. They were priority targets. They carried explosive fuel on their backs into combat. The psychological burden of using fire as a weapon, of hearing the screams from inside bunkers you couldn't see, was something that stayed with operators for the rest of their lives. Many didn't talk about it. Williams rarely discussed the details of February 23rd, even decades later. The Japanese soldiers who died in those bunkers weren't monsters. They were men following orders, defending fortifications they believed would protect them. The concrete was 4 feet thick. The walls were reinforced with steel. By every engineering standard, they should have been safe. That they weren't, that fire could reach them where shells could not, was a horror neither side had fully anticipated. What endures? Woody Williams returned to West Virginia after the war. He worked as a VA hospital counselor, helping other veterans process what they'd experienced. He spoke at Marine Corps events, at Medal of Honor ceremonies, always emphasizing the same point. The medal represented every Marine who fought on Iwo Jima, not just him. He lived to be 98 years old, the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from World War II when he died in June 2022. He never forgot the 4 riflemen who died trying to cover his advance. He never forgot the pole charge man who took a bullet to the helmet. In interviews late in life, he'd talk about them more than his own actions. "I just did what needed to be done," he'd say. "A lot of men did more and didn't come home." The flamethrower itself fell out of military use. The U.S. Army and Marines stopped issuing man-portable flamethrowers in the 1970s. Protocol 3 of the Geneva Convention restricts the use of incendiary weapons. The images from Vietnam, the photographs of burning villages, of children fleeing napalm strikes, turned public opinion permanently against fire as a weapon. The flamethrower became a relic, a museum piece, a weapon too terrible for modern warfare. But the lesson from Iwo Jima endures. In Ukraine today, in the grinding urban warfare of cities reduced to rubble, flamethrowers have reappeared. In any conflict where troops fight from fortified positions, where concrete bunkers protect defenders from conventional weapons, someone will eventually turn to fire. The technology changes. The tactics evolve. The fundamental equation remains. Enclosed spaces need oxygen, and fire consumes it faster than ventilation can replace it. The pillboxes on Iwo Jima are still there, 75 years later. The concrete Kurabayashi's engineers poured is still standing, pockmarked by bullets and shrapnel, but structurally intact. You can walk up to them, peer through the firing slits, see where the volcanic sand has drifted inside. The walls are still 4 feet thick. The reinforcing steel is still sound. But step inside, and you understand what Williams understood on February 23, 1945. The thickness of the walls doesn't matter if there's no air to breathe. The strength of the concrete is irrelevant if the atmosphere inside reaches 1,000 degrees. The Japanese soldiers who built these fortifications believed they were creating an impregnable defense. They were right about the concrete. They were wrong about what that concrete needed to protect. 21,000 Japanese soldiers went underground on Iwo Jima. Only 216 came out alive. The rest died in their fortifications, killed by artillery, grenades, satchel charges, and flamethrowers. Most by flamethrowers. The weapon they thought wouldn't matter because concrete doesn't burn. Concrete doesn't burn. But men do. And men need oxygen. And napalm at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit consumes oxygen faster than any ventilation system can replace it. That's what the Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima couldn't believe. Not until the flames came through the firing slits. Not until the temperature climbed and the air disappeared and their impregnable fortress became their tomb. By then, believing didn't matter anymore.